Hello and welcome back. In this short lecture, we're going to learn about iOS device profile creation related to the device restriction. In the previous section or previous lecture, we learned about device features relevant to iOS, where we try to implement our A-print or home screen layout, app notification, lock screen, single sign-on options, content filtering, and wallpaper settings. All of these we try to configure with our policies. Now let's go ahead and create another policy, but this time not for the device features, but we are gonna restrict some of the device specific settings, and that's what this session all about it. To create a specific profile, what we can do is we can create a new profile and give a meaningful name along with the description, and then choose platform as iOS and select device restrictions. This is where it's gonna configure device restrictions or more about the settings which are coming up here. And I can choose here the general settings like shared users data. If I choose the shared users data as block, that means it's going to block to prevent the devices from sending diagnostic and users data to Apple devices, or Apple in fact to the Apple company, to the principal company who manufactured this iOS device. And if I choose diagnostic submission settings modification policy, this is going to be it's going to be great now, because since I've already blocked it. And if I just wanted to block this specific policy instead of this, so what would happen is it's gonna prevent, if I take as a block, it's gonna prevent the users from changing diagnostic submission and app analytic specific settings in the diagnostic and the users, that is under device settings. You can find out in iOS device, and that's not going to be allow you to do that specific configuration. And remember, these two specific settings are relevant to iOS 9.3.2 and later. And coming back to the screen capture, if I screen capture block, that means it's not gonna allow you to take any kind of screenshots. That way you're gonna securing your company data or corporate data. And if you don't configure this, you do have the two more options, like if the mission is if the device is in a remote screen observation, then by example classroom app, then it can be blocked, or such settings can be applied. If you choose untrusted TLS certificate, that means it's going to prevent, for example, if I block it, it's going to prevent untrusted transport layer security. That's nothing but TLS certificates on the device. So that way you're going to securing your device. And coming back to the enterprise app trust, which is, if you choose the enterprise a trust, what would happen is basically, or if you choose as a block, in fact, let's take this as a block, what would happen is it's gonna block to remove the enterprise trust developer button configuration, which is in your iOS settings, general profile, and device management on the device. So that's the configuration which is gonna block. So you are actually restricting that not to do any kind of modifications to that specific settings. And coming back to the account modification, so what would happen is if you block it, the users can't update the device specific settings from iOS settings app. For example, let's take an example. There is a user, he cannot create a new device accounts, or maybe can't change the username and the password which was configured on that specific device. These are the settings can be configured account specific modification. And coming back to the screen time, so when you configure this specific setting as block, what would happen is it's going to prevent users from setting their own restrictions in the screen time, like in the device settings especially. And if you configure as not configure, allow users to configure their device restrictions. For example, you can set as the parental control or content and privacy restrictions. All that can be configure if you set it as not configured. And if you want to block that specific settings like parental control or contenting information, content kind of information, or the apps or the privacy based settings, then you can block it. If you look at the next option or next configuration under general, use of the erase all content and settings options on the device. So what would happen is if you configure as a block as this policy, it's going to be users, for example, if the user is trying to do erase all content and content from the settings option, it's gonna prevent that, so he can't erase the content from the device. That's what this configuration which can help us. And coming back to the device name, what would happen is device name modification, you can't if you configure as a block, the device name can't be changed by the users. That's how it's going to work. And coming back to the notification settings modification, what would happen is you're going to block that the notifications so that they can't change any configuration by the users. And if you choose the modification of wallpaper, the users can't change their wallpaper. Similarly, enterprise app trust settings modification, if you want to prevent that users from changing the enterprise app trust settings on the devices, in that situation you can block this specific configuration. And configuration of profile changes, anything to do the user a specific configuration of the profile changes, it's going to block it. Other most common corporate used policy would be the activation lock. What happens is when you allow this configuration, what would happen is the users whatever the device is got activated, it's going to enable activation lock on supervised iOS devices. So this way activation lock makes it harder for lost or stolen devices to be reactivated. So you can't reactivate it if the device is lost or stolen. That way you're going to securing your device. And coming back to the block app removal, what happens is if you configure this as a block, it's going to prevent users from removing apps. That way whatever the apps are on that specific device, it remains as it is. And blocked USB restricted mode, if you choose this as a block, what would happen is USB restricted mode prevents USB accessories from exchanging data with device that's in a locked over and ever, or whatever the configuration you are configuring here. And force automatic date and time, this configuration basically gives you ability to when you set it as a required, it's going to be configured automatically time and date. And device time zone is updated when the device has cellular connection or maybe a Wi-Fi, so it uses those any of them option, and it's gonna update that specific configuration. Also required students to request permissions to leave classroom course. This is more useful if you're using Intune for education or such kind of scenario where it's a university or college kind of scenario, then this configuration will be used. Or when we configure as required, it forces students to enroll in an unmanaged course using the classroom app to request the required permissions from the teacher to leave the course. That way it's gonna set this specific setting, and this configuration requires at least iOS 11.3 and later configurations. Coming back to the next configuration, allow classroom to lock to an app and lock the device without prompting supervised only. What happens is when you enable this specific configuration, it allows the teacher to lock the apps or lock the device using the classroom app without prompting the students. By locking the apps means exactly the device can be only accessed teacher specified apps, so you're not going to have any other apps, so it's all are relevant to that specific teachers approved apps. And if you configure it as not configure, it prevents teachers from locking apps, so teacher doesn't have any control. And again, this specific configuration require at least iOS 11.0 and later. And similarly, you also have another option, automatically join classroom classes without prompting. So this specific configuration also can be configured as enabled. What would happen is when you configure enable, it automatically allows students to join a class that is in the classroom app without prompting the teacher. So what would happen is there's no teacher's approval, it's gonna directly join in that classroom, so that way you can get it benefited by the students. So these specific settings are relevant to colleges or universities. Similarly, and this specific setting also required iOS 11 and later. So these two settings, whatever this is, are relevant to the classroom app specific or at least require 11.0 version of iOS. And similarly, allow over the air PKI updates. What happens is if you configure as allow, it will allow users to receive software updates without connecting to the devices to your computer. So over the internet also they can get that specific update. And limiting and tracking is the next option. When you configure the specific settings, for example, if you choose as a limit, it's going to disable the device advertising identifier information, and that way it will be useful for tracking. And coming back to the block VPN creation, this specific option will block the users from creating VPN configuration settings, and that way they are not going to create any kind of VPN. So that means they are within that corporate network. That kind of configuration you can do it. And coming back to the modify eSIM settings, which are electronic mode of whatever the SIM you're going to use. This is again 12.1 iOS because that's where the specific settings can be managed. And if you choose as a block, what happens is it prevents users from removing or adding a cellular plan to the eSIM on the device. That's how you can configure. Now the last option would be the deferred software updates. What happens is if you defer from the software updates like configure as enable, it's going to be deferred for a specific interval of days, and here you can configure anything from 0 to 90 days, and this specific setting also starts from 11.3 to sometimes 12.8 also, but let's take this as being 11.3. so these are the settings which can be configured under device restrictions for the general settings, and click on OK. Once you have configured all those settings, let's go back to the password settings. So these password settings are more about securing with the password. So this specific settings almost similar what we have done so far on Android devices or maybe on Windows 10 devices. Let's have a look on it. When you configure as required, that means the end user has to enter the password to access that specific device. Once you have enabled that, you can configure the below options. So let's configure each of them. One would be the simple password. So when you choose a simple password, what exactly simple password as per Microsoft Intune is, like if you configure like all 00s or 123 or ABC 123, such simple passwords or guessable passwords are simple password. If you want to block them, you can simply click on block. So you can't set that kind of passwords by the end users, can't set that specific passwords, like I can't set it like 1234 as a password. And required admin password or required the password type would be the complexity. I can configure here as the alphanumerical, which is more secure, so that the I can define even the alphanumerical here as non-alphanumerical characters must be at least the 4-digit or 4 characters at least, and then minimum password length should be at least 8 characters, so that you are more securing, and the number of failed logon attempts gonna wipe up your device. You can configure as 4 or 5. Make sure that your kids are not using that specific device. If so, it can wipe up even if you are trying to play with the wrong passwords, and that way you can secure the devices. And maximum minutes after screen lock, you can enter here the how long the device says idle before the user must re-enter their password. If the time you entered is longer than or what's currently set on the device, then the device ignores the time you entered. So it's going to support from iOS 8.0 and later versions. I'm going to configure here as the 5 minutes, and similarly I also have the maximum minutes of inactivity until screen locks. This is also similar setting, but it's going to be you need to enter here the maximum number of minutes for inactivity allowed on that specific devices until the screen gets locked. If the time you enter is longer than what's configured on the device, then the device ignores the time you entered and it will set it to immediately. That's how you are gonna configure these specific settings. And the minimum time would be on iPhone it's 30 seconds, on iPad is 2 minutes. That's what the minimum configuration. So make sure that it's just for iOS, it's not just for the Apple iPhone. It can be on iPad also, because we are talking about just the iOS specific operating system. So make sure that you know what kind of configuration you're trying to configure, based on that is going to apply. So I'm just giving as anything 3 minutes would be the good. And similarly, you can enter the password expansion date, which is going to be here. The number of days of the password must be changed. Say I have changed my password last 30 days back. Now it's time to change. It's gonna ask you to give the new password. For example, if I give as a 30, so post to the 30 days, it's going to ask you, hey, you have to change the password. And similarly, you can't reuse that, change the password again and again. To prevent that, you can give a configuration as maybe you can't reuse that 5 repeated passwords, or 5 last passwords can't be reused. That's how you can use, so that you are preventing reuse of previous passwords. It's nothing but your password history, so it's going to remember that 5 passwords and you can't reuse them. And if you want to prevent touch ID as well as a face ID to unlock, because face ID to unlock is not so much secure when compared with at least the touch ID. So always the alphanumerical password is more complex, and that would be more secure. So some of the companies, they don't want to use a face ID to unlock, and that way you can block that specific setting. The next setting would be the passcode modification, and this is if you choose as a block to stop. That means if you choose as a block, it's gonna stop the passcode from being changed and added or removed. And coming back to the next one would be the block password autofill. So when you choose as a block to, it automatically prevents using the autofill password features on iOS. Choosing the block has basically some of the impacts, like users aren't prompted for the saving the password in Safari or any of the apps. So that way it's going to be somehow you're going to controlling the browser specific or the password specific settings. And automatic strong passwords are disabled, and strong passwords aren't suggested to the users. These are the one of the features from the Safari or similar to Google Chrome, where it will automatically suggest some kind of strong passwords. That option would be automatically disabled when you block this option. And coming back to the block password proximity request, which is nothing but when you configure this as a block, it actually user's device does not request passwords from the nearby devices. This option would be automatically blocked, and you can configure this as a block. And coming back to the block password sharing, which will actually prevents when you block it, actually it's going to prevent sharing the passwords between different devices by using AirDrop. This configuration is you can configure as a block. And coming back to the required touch ID or face ID authentication for passwords or credit card information autofill. So what happens is when you are actually using when you configure as a request, users must have to authenticate using Touch ID or Face ID before passwords or the credit card information can be automatically filled in Safari or any kind of other applications. That concludes almost all the configuration and the passwords. And coming back to the required Touch ID and Face ID, this requires at least iOS 11 and later operating systems. And that concludes the configuration of passwords. Click on OK and jump back to the locked screen experience. This locked screen experience will control with the control center access when the device is locked. This specific setting will block if you choose as a block to prevent users to the control center apps while it is locked. Notification center access while device locked. If you choose as a block, it's going to prevent access to the notifications when the device is locked. And coming back to the valid notifications while device is locked, it's going to be when you choose as a block, it's going to be prevent access to the valid app when the device is locked. And this is going to be most secure one, I would prefer. And 2D view while device locked. So 2D view while device is locked is when you configure as a block, prevents access to the 2D view when the device is locked. These are the configurations you can configure, these 4 configurations inside lock screen experience. Coming back to the App Store, dock viewing, gaming, all this going to be exciting. In fact, if you can look at App Store, you want to block App Store, that would blocking even the including installing application from App Store, automatic app downloads. This is gonna block. If you don't configure here, but you wanna just block installing applications, you can do it so that the App Store users can't go to the App Store and they can't install any of the applications. That way, you're securing, you're not welcoming, or you're not onboarding any other applications which are relevant to personal maybe, or not relevant to your organization standards or organization application, since the device is owned by your organization. Now let's go back to the require iTunes store password for all purchases. This is very much required if you are trying to purchase, when I say you, end user trying to purchase Intune store passwords, it's going to ask for that password. And app purchasing also can be blocked so that users can't it's going to prevent an app purchases from the store. And the explicit iTunes music, broadcast, and news content, you want to block it, you can block it from the direct Intune as Intune admin. Coming back to the download content from iBook store flagged as erotica can be blocked so that it's not relevant to your company's standards, or maybe a category of non-relevant to the organization standards. One of the most important configuration would be viewing corporate documents in unmanaged apps. Let's say if you look at if you standard as the application as a Word, but the Word document can be open in some other third-party documents like OpenOffice or some other applications. If you want to prevent that not to open in such applications, then you can block it. You can take one more example. For example, you want to prevent users from saving files from OneDrive app to Dropbox, because both are cloud-based, but you don't want users to save the corporate data which is on OneDrive instead of OneDrive. If the user trying to store in a Dropbox or Dropbox for Business or some other application, maybe you can block that kind of configuration so that you are securing your entire corporate data. That is very much critical. And when you come back to the managed apps, to write contacts to unmanaged contacts means, for example, Outlook has contacts. So similar contacts, if you want to write that to unmanaged contacts account, you can prevent that. So these things are very much required. And coming back to the allow unmanaged apps to read from unmanaged contacts accounts, it's vice versa. Like you have the unmanaged app and you are trying to read the contacts from managed application, which is app to app kind of permissions it is gathering. So that you can block it if you wanna. And coming back to the view non-corporate documents in a corporate apps, this specific setting also very much important because you are referring to the non-corporate documents. Let's say the user has configured his Gmail in his iOS device, and that has an attachment which is a personal attachment. And if it is trying to open that Word document or whatever the document which has an extension also available from the corporate App Store or corporate application, if you're trying to open that, you can block it. This is very much required. And coming back to the treat a drop as unmanaged destination, this means basically you want to consider an unmanaged drop target. Then it stops the managed apps from sending data using airdrops. That's very much also required, one of the configuration. And adding game center for your friends. Coming back to this specific setting, if you try to block it, it's going to prevent users from adding game center friends, and that way you're not adding any of the friends as the game center. And coming back to the game center itself, you want to block it, you can block it. And coming back to the multiplayer gaming, so this is if you want to play on a mobile with a multiplayer, you can block it. This is also one of the configuration. On corporate devices, definitely you don't need these configurations, so you can block it. And coming back to the rating region, ratings are relevant to the region. So what happens is this specific setting is applicable for movies, TV shows, and also for some of the apps. Let's have a look on it. Like if you just configure here, you don't want to configure ratings in Canada, maybe Australia, that specific settings can be allowed or maybe blocked. That kind of settings can be configured. For example, in Canada, movies rating, you don't want to allow them to, don't allow the movies, or TV shows you don't want allow. Such things can be configured on your applications. Maybe you want to allow the applications to rate only 17 plus. Most probably those are business applications, so that users can give a rating per region basis. That's how they can configure. Let's jump back to the built-in apps. So for the built-in apps, for example, camera or Siri or server-side information, maybe like Apple News or iBook Store messaging app, all that kind of settings which are coming from the built-in apps, you want to allow or block kind of configuration can be done. For example, it's straightforward. There's no big deal here, but you want to stop the built-in applications, you can do this from here. For example, you don't want to allow the camera, you can do that, but you want to allow camera but you want to block FaceTime, or you want to allow, or you want to block Siri and you want to allow maybe some other application like Google or maybe Alexa, you can do that. But here in this case, you can block Siri. Such configurations can be done like server-side logging from Siri commands. You can, when you disable, basically what happens is a server-side Siri logging is turned off, so it can also prevent whatever the logging happening with the user request on the Siri servers also will be stopped. This is the option of server-side logging. Coming back to the Apple News, you don't want to allow for the Apple News. For example, you want to block it, you can block it. Similarly, iBook Store, you want to block it, you can block. And the messaging app, definitely this is required. Maybe a broadcast required. Maybe music services, you want to block it, you can block it. iTunes radio services, you don't need on corporate devices. So if you think, or if you think your design includes this kind of configuration to block it, you can go ahead and block. I'm just talking all the features, what are the features are available and how to configure and what features are meant for what purpose. And coming back to the changes to the my friends app settings, if you want to block, you can block this specific setting. Similarly, spotlight search, it's gonna result from the internet also, so if you don't want to block, you can block, but I feel it can be leave, so that users can go for the federated search, or maybe you can talk it as a spotlight search in this case. And coming back to the block, removal of system apps from the device. So when you choose as a block, it's gonna disable the ability of removing system application from the device, so that you're not gonna do any kind of modification relevant to the system apps on that machine. And coming back to the Safari specific settings, in the Safari, you want to block the Safari, you want to autofill block, or you want to allow the cookies, you want to block all cookies, allowing the JavaScripts or fraud warnings you want to require. You can configure even though you want to block the pop-ups. These kind of configurations can be configured under built-in applications. Now let's jump into the restricted apps. This restricted apps gives the two abilities, or two kind of applications. One would be the prohibited apps, other one would be the approved apps. When we talk about the prohibited apps, a list of apps that are not managed by Intune, and that you don't want to install on that specific device. In that situation, you're gonna configure as prohibited apps. And if a user install it from app or from his own list, then you're not going to be notified. And in that situation, you can block it up as the prohibited apps. And coming back to the approved apps, a list of applications that are basically allowed to install. To say, for example, a complaint purpose, or user must not install other apps other than that specific type of applications, because you maybe bought those applications as a trust or maybe corporate owned applications, so you wanted to give them as the approved for the end users on their devices. In that situation, you're going to use the approved apps. Apps that are managed by the Intune are automatically allowed in this situation, and if the user install the app from the list, you're going to be notified by the Intune as the automatically. Now let's have a configuration how to do that. Basically, to add this, you need to go to here, and here what are the type of the configuration you're going to do it. For example, if I try to add the prohibited apps, I should be adding here the specific URL of that specific app and app bundle, app name, and publisher information. And if you have the list with these, columns, you can also import that specific applications list altogether. Let's take one of the example here how to add that, so that you will come to know how to do that. To get that specific URL of your application, what you can do is you can open your iTunes, and then you can search for a specific application, whatever you wanted to block. For example, if I want to block some kind of application, what I will do is I'll just search in my iTunes or App Store, and then I would get that specific application name. For example, if I take it, this is the application which is available from my App Store, right? So this is the app. Once it is available, what I'm going to do is I'll just take this as the copy. I'll just copy this URL altogether, and then I would copy paste this information into add URL, and I'm gonna give the app ID or the app bundle ID, which I can give here the URL, and then .com.apple, whatever the bundle ID, and then app name, and also the publisher of that. This information I can get it from that URL, then I can add it. The settings is basically you don't need to mandatory as a give this information of everything, but it all depends. If you have the Excel file, you can use those Excel with those settings, and then you can import. This is applicable for the prohibited apps. Similarly, you can also use the approved applications also similar way, and similarly you can use the URL and app ID, app name, publisher, so that you can approve or you can prohibit those applications. Let's go back to the show some of the hidden apps. That means some application which you wanted to hide completely from the device, then you can configure the specific configuration. For example, I want to hide some of the applications, so you just go to the App Store or go to your intune.apple.com and then search for that specific application, and then copy that URL and give it that specific URL. That way you can block that specific application. Similarly, when I say block, actually you're gonna hide that specific application. Similarly, you wanna visible some of the applications, you can do that specific applications, and this is how you can configure. And just want to make a clear point here. These restricted apps, whatever we have configured, is applicable for user configuration. So the users must be you should target to the users group, not for the devices group. That way it's going to apply the specific settings. Now let's jump into the wireless configuration, which is very much important here. If you are using the wireless configuration like data roaming, if you want to block that, when you choose the block, basically it's going to prevent the data roaming over the cellular network. So it's not going to be allow you to connect to the internet when you are actually roaming. And the global background fetch while roaming. What would happen is, if you choose as a block in this situation here, it's gonna prevent using the global background fetch feature when actually roaming over the cellular network. So this specific two settings, at least for the roaming specific. Now let's jump into the voice dialing. If you want to block that voice dialing, you can do that. Voice roaming, you can block it, or when the user is roaming from his corporate office to maybe to other region altogether, you can block that voice calls also, or voice dialing also. And now change the app cellular data using user settings. When you configure this specific setting as block, it's going to prevent users from changing any settings in the cellular plan. So you're not allowed to change anything in the cellular plan. And remember that this specific setting is at least required iOS 11 and above, not 11 and below. And coming back to the personal hotspot, you can configure the personal hotspot. If you want to block that specific configuration, you can block it. So when you turn off, when you block it, basically it's going to turn off the personal hotspot on the users. So users can't enable their devices to make it as a personal hotspot, so that you're saving your cellular data. And coming back to the user modification of the personal hotspot, if you have already configured your hotspot configuration and you don't want to allow them to change it, you can't change when you block that specific configuration. And this also require at least a specific setting of iOS 12.2 and later iOS specific devices. And join Wi-Fi networks only using configuration profiles. This is a specific setting which is, if you remember, we did also configure Wi-Fi profiles. From the ancient configuration, so that way only it should be connected, or it should be only joined from only Wi-Fi network options. That's what this specific configuration. So users can't join on their own. Whatever you are pushing from the Intune, only that will be used. And coming back to the cellular usage rules, you can configure some of the rules so that you can define data type that manage apps, or can be configured for the cellular network. So you have some of the options like block uses of cellular data, or block uses of cellular data when roaming. So these are the two options what you have. If the user is roaming, you can block it from here uh, with this specific setting. Like, I don't want users to be all managed applications, only block users of cellular data when all the managed applications. And when you want to allow them to block, or when you want to block basically cellular data, you can block it all managed, or you can choose some specific application. Again, you need to add that similar fashion, like you have all the inventory from your app store. You can add here, like, you don't want Excel to be consume some kind of bandwidth, then you can block that specific way. Same settings can be configured similar way. You can search and configure here also, which is going to be while roaming also. So both the cases you can configure as per your requirement. And let's go to the next configuration, which is connected devices, which has almost 11 settings, which is nothing but a collaboration from iOS device to other iOS devices. So in this situation, you can configure here like airdrop. Airdrop option, you want to block, you can block it. So by doing the airdrop, what happens is this feature doesn't allow to exchange the content with the nearby devices, and you can block this specific setting. Apple Watch pairing. If you block this, you're not gonna allow the Apple Watches to pair. Uh, and coming back to the wrist detection for paid Apple Watch, you can block this specific setting. Similarly, Bluetooth notification host pairing to control the devices, and iOS device can pair with other devices. So what would happen is here, like if you configure as not to configure, what would happen is basically allow host pairing to the let administrator control which devices and iOS devices can pair with, and if you block it, it's not going to allow to block with any paired with any of the devices. And require AirPlay outgoing request pairing password. If you want to block, you can block, so that AirPlay relevant, for example, AirPlay, which is going to stream the content to other Apple devices, you're going to actually prevent by some kind of pairing passwords. If you configure as required. Coming back to the AirPrint, you can block the AirPrint option, or you can block storage of AirPrint credentials in keychain. When you configure as a block, it's going to prevent using the keychain storage for username and password on those devices. Similarly, and the next option would be the required a trusted TLS certificate for AirPrint. And that means if you configure as a required, it's going to force a device to use a trusted certificate for TLS printing communication. Similarly, you also have this specific setting is more important if there are some kind of AirPrint Bluetooth beacons which are trying from the phishing over the network traffic. It's going to block it. So this specific block iBeacon discovery of AirPrinter traffic can be blocked. If you want to block that malicious or suspected traffic, if you want to block, you can block it. Block setting up in new nearby devices, which is like the nearby devices. If you want to block it, you can block those devices. And this specific setting at least required iOS 11 and later operating systems. Clicking on OK. And going back to the keyboard and dictionary, these are the specific settings, which are almost six different settings are available. Word definition lookup, you want to block it, you can block it. It's nothing but your dictionary. If you right click when you select on the text, it's going to show up as the dictionary. That's if you want to block it, you can block. And predict keyboards, you can do it this specific setting, so that allows the users predictive keyboards to suggest words that user might want, for example. And auto correction, this is another feature you wanna, if what happens is it basically gives you or it allows the devices to automatically correct misspelled words. If you want to block, you can block it, but I think, it's not better to, it's not to block, in fact, because that is very much required. Almost all these features are almost required, so we don't configure most of the time, but it all depends on company to company. Other option would be the keyboard spell check. This is, as name says, that if you want to allow using spell checker on the device, you can configure the specific setting if you want to block it. If not, when you not configure, it's gonna allows the spell checker to check on the device. And keyboard shortcuts, if you not configure, that means you're allowing using keyboard shortcuts on the device. And if you use the detection configuration as a block, that means it's going to stop the user from using voice input to enter text. Like sometimes, some guys, they just want to type over the mic. If you want to block that kind of situation, you can block that. It all depends company to company. And coming back to the cloud and storage, this is a specific setting. Like you want to back up to iCloud. If you have don't want to back up to iCloud, you can block it, but it might require it. And coming back to the block iCloud document sync, photo stream syncing, encrypt the backup, iCloud photo library, managed app sync to cloud, shared photo stream, all these are relevant to the cloud storage of Apple, basically. And you can check out here keychain sync. You want to block enterprise book backup. All these kind of activities are very relevant, and it's easy to understand. So if you have any questions on this, you can always come back to me, but these are very basic, in fact. And syncing option, metadata, or you're streaming your photos, or these are very, very, very basic, in fact. So I'm just skipping this section and coming back to the other section called autonomous single app mode, which is nothing but similar to the test what we have done on Windows 10 and later devices configuration. Let's talk about this autonomous single app mode. What happens is when you use this kind of configuration, or when you configure here, what happens is these settings to configure iOS devices to run a specific apps and autonomous single mode app. What would happen is when this mode is configured and the app is running, the device is completely locked and it only runs that specific app. For example, let's take an example. If you have an app, or you just added from here the app name and the app bundle ID example, what would happen is it's going to be take a test that specific app on that specific device, and when the actions complete, then it's going to remove this policy and the device runs into normal state. So this has to be configured as a separate policy and then apply, otherwise you're going to face other problems. So let's go back to the kiosk settings. Kiosk settings are if you're trying to test some kind of applications, you're gonna test those configurations. So these are the device specific options which you wanted to run in a kiosk mode. For example, you also have here not configure or store apps, some of the managed apps, some of the built-in apps. So what application you want to run in a kiosk mode, that specific things can be configured from here. Take one example as a built-in app. So what you need to do is you need to enter that built-in app ID, as I have explained earlier. You can get it from the built-in apps ID from this URLs, right? We did talk about the built-in IDs, so bundle ID or built-in IDs. Once you go back to that specific bundle ID and enter that specific ID, once you enter that specific built-in ID, you want to do the kiosk for example here Zoom. You don't want to configure, or you want to require to the Zoom or auto lock, or these are the settings it's going to be configured, so that these settings would configure that for that specific application in a demo mode altogether, so that users can test it and they can do their own testing. That's how it's going to work. And as I have already talked about the built-in IDs, this is the one more time I'm going to show you here the specific built-in IDs. If you want to get that specific built-in IDs information, you can always get it from here, that specific built-in ID information. And once you have configured that, you can do the specific settings. Now let's go to the domains. Here the domains are unmarked email domains. So out of these three of these settings, you can configure here, for example, you don't want, for example, yahoo.com only easy trusted. Other than these, whatever the emails are flowing between your end user's device, it's going to be untrusted domains. Such a way you can configure, but this is more irrelevant, at least for my point of view. But sometimes it's more relevant if you want to lock it more aggressively for only specific settings to be specific communication should be only happen for those specific devices, then that specific things can be configured from here. Similarly, you can also have the web domains, which is nothing but the URLs. You can configure here as the only allowed to download. For example, you can configure whatever the downloads should happen, that should only happen from only this website. Like, or in my case, I'm allowing for Microsoft, but not for other websites to be allowed. Such a way you can configure that specific setting. Similarly, you want to save automatically the passwords for those specific apps or specific websites. Then you can do it when you are using this Safari browser altogether, and then you can add that specific domain name, anything like without the HTTP and www, you can give that name so that it can be added. These are the settings which we have discussed so far under device restrictions. You can simply click OK and then click OK so that the policy can be created here, and post to that you can apply the specific policy to the required assignments can be assigned. So in our case, we have done all the policy configuration in one policy called iOS device restrictions. But in the real world, it's not the case. Okay, this policy might be splitted maybe in more than maybe 10 or 15 different policy names, because some of the policy settings are relevant for only users, some of them are device specific, some of them both the way works, and the other way, these policies, whatever you're applying, for the testing purpose, it is always recommended to go for a limited level of settings in each policy, and then you can explicitly target to the required audience. You can't configure the same Wi-Fi profile settings everywhere. Maybe for one office, policy would be different. For other office, the password and the settings of that specific device might be different. So you can't apply these settings as it is for all the users globally. So make sure that you are applying for only required people. So in my case, I'm just gonna apply for only finance people. So what I'm gonna do is here under all devices, I'm gonna explicitly selecting that including group here just for the finance as the users. Let's jump here. It's taking some time, but yeah, it's loaded. All finance users group, select that. So whoever using finance user group with the iOS device settings are gonna apply for them. So that's how the configuration for the iOS device restrictions has been configured. Thank you for watching this.